from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and Alexander Harrington was already on the verge of a breakdown. Lily, his 2-year-old daughter, was crying like the world was ending, and nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed to work. He had tried a bottle, toys, made-up songs, even massaging her little feet, but the crying only got louder. With every passing minute, the looks around him grew more and more impatient. The luxury of first class now seemed completely useless in the face of his inconsolable baby's cries. Alexander, CEO of one of New York's biggest tech companies, a man used to meetings with billion-dollar investors and high-stakes decisions, was now totally exhausted. "Please, Lily, calm down," he whispered, trying to stay composed. But Lily wasn't negotiating. She kicked, reached out her arms, tossed the pacifier far away. A flight attendant came over with a tense look. "Can I bring you something, Mr. Harrington? Maybe an extra pillow?" "Only if that pillow comes with superpowers," he replied dryly. She forced a polite smile and walked away. In economy class, Sarah Thompson was trying to focus on her book, but the crying echoing all the way from first class to the front row of economy made that impossible. She had boarded the flight from Dallas to New York with a simple goal: to relax with a good read. But now she was on the edge of losing her mind. Seeing that no one was doing anything, just sighing, whispering, or complaining, she felt strangely unsettled. She wasn't one to interfere, never had been, but something about that crying hit her in a way she couldn't explain. Without thinking, she stood up and walked toward the curtain that separated the classes, took a deep breath, and stepped through. Alexander didn't even notice her approach. He was too busy trying to balance the baby in one arm while searching for the pacifier Lily had thrown, and who knows where with the other. "Sorry to bother you," Sarah said, her voice shy. "Can I try to help?" Alexander looked at her, puzzled, as if trying to remember where he'd seen her before. "I've tried everything," he replied. "She won't let anyone near her." "Sometimes it works better with someone who isn't the parent," Sarah insisted. "Mind if I try singing to her?" He hesitated for a second, then gave in, worn out. Sarah crouched down to Lily's level without touching her. Lily stopped squirming for a moment and looked at her with bright eyes still full of tears. Sarah gently picked her up and started to sing softly, a quiet, calming melody like someone singing to the breeze. As she sang, she made slow motions behind the baby's head, drawing invisible circles of calm. Slowly, as if by magic, the crying began to fade. First, it turned into little sobs, then a sigh, and finally, Lily rested her head on Sarah's shoulder and fell asleep. Alexander stood there speechless. "What? What did you just do?" "A little trick my grandmother taught me," Sarah answered with a modest smile. He blinked, visibly relieved. "You're an angel disguised as a passenger." Sarah didn't reply. She just gently handed Lily back to him. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, almost moved. "You're welcome. Just keep your hold gentle. She trusts your arm now." Sarah stepped back and quietly returned to her seat in economy. She sat down with her heart racing as if she had just done something completely crazy and yet absolutely right. The rest of the flight was peaceful. Lily stayed asleep, and Alexander, though tired, seemed to breathe easier. After landing in New York, Sarah gathered her things, ready to leave, when a flight attendant stopped by her side. "This is for you," she said, handing her a small envelope. Sarah opened it curiously. Inside, a short note written in elegant handwriting. "You saved my day. Thank you so much." She read it, smiled, and thought to herself, "I'll probably never see those two adorable people again." But she had no idea how wrong she was. 2 days later, Sarah Thompson adjusted her blazer for the third time in 5 minutes as she walked through the halls of the Riverside Community Center. The interview for coordinator of the new children's library section was her big chance to finally land a decent job in New York. After 3 months of sending out resumes and only getting automated rejection emails, she was determined to make a good impression. "You've got this, Sarah," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath. "It's just an interview. What could possibly go wrong?" The answer to that question came exactly 3 seconds later. As she turned the corner toward the waiting room, Sarah walked straight into something, or rather someone, pushing a baby stroller. The impact was so strong that she stumbled backward, dropping her folder and sending resumes flying across the floor like confetti at a party no one had planned. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she blurted quickly, kneeling down to gather the papers. "No, it was my fault. I was just—" The familiar voice trailed off. Sarah looked up and nearly choked. Standing there with a pink baby stroller and a look of total surprise was Alexander Harrington, the same man from the plane. The same polished CEO, now wearing a dress shirt with a suspicious carrot puree-looking stain on the shoulder. "You," they both said at the same time, pointing at each other. Lily, comfortably nestled in the stroller, clapped her little hands when she saw Sarah, as if watching a particularly entertaining show. "What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, still half-crouched, holding a crumpled resume. "I could ask you the same thing," Alexander replied, running a nervous hand through his hair. "Are you following me? Following you? I didn't even know you existed until 2 days ago." Sarah stood up, clearly offended. "And even if I did, why would I follow someone who wears a suit to walk a baby on a Tuesday morning?" "This isn't a walk. Alexander paused, realizing how absurd the situation sounded. "Wait, why are you here? Job interview, children's library coordinator." Alexander opened his mouth to answer, but at that moment his shoulder bag hanging from the stroller suddenly came undone, spilling diapers, wet wipes, a baby bottle, and what looked like a jar of baby food across the reception floor. Sarah looked at the mess, then at Alexander, then at Lily, who kept clapping like she was at the circus. "Seriously?" Sarah couldn't help but laugh. "You're the mystery investor who was supposed to meet the candidates today. How do you know about the investor?" Alexander asked, kneeling down to collect the diapers with the dignity of someone who just realized life has a very odd sense of humor. "Because the receptionist mentioned that one of the main project backers would be present," Sarah said, helping him gather the items, trying not to laugh at his mortified expression. "I just didn't imagine the backer would show up with his diaper team." "Very funny," Alexander grumbled, stuffing a wet wipe back in the bag. "And for your information, I didn't plan to bring Lily. The nanny quit a week ago, and I'm handling everything myself." "A week?" Sarah stopped laughing. "You've been taking care of her all by yourself for a whole week?" "Technically, it's 6 days, 14 hours, and he checked his watch, 42 minutes, but who's counting?" Lily chose that moment to reach her arms out towards Sarah, making that sweet little sound only babies make when they want something. "She wants to go with you," Alexander said, a mix of surprise and relief in his voice. "Hi, sweetheart." Sarah moved closer to the stroller and Lily immediately grabbed her finger tightly. "Have you been giving Daddy a hard time?" As if she understood the question, Lily giggled and pointed at Alexander, who was still struggling to zip up the stubborn bag. "Looks like she's saying yes." Sarah laughed. "And honestly, I think she's right. May I interrupt this lovely family moment?" A voice cut through the air. Sarah and Alexander turned to see a middle-aged woman holding a tablet with a look like she just witnessed something that definitely wasn't in her schedule. "Mrs. Jenkins." Alexander quickly stood up, trying to switch to professional mode. "This is Sarah Thompson, one of the candidates." "I see that," the woman said, eyeing the mess on the floor. And then Sarah, who was still holding Lily's hand. "Miss Thompson, I'm sorry to say, we'll have to reschedule your interview." "Reschedule?" Sarah's stomach sank. "Why?" "A minor issue in the meeting room. Ceiling leak." "Mrs. Jenkins Seahead, could we move it to Thursday?" Sarah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. 2 more days of waiting and uncertainty. "Perfect." "Mrs. Jenkins tapped something on her tablet. "Mr. Harrington, can you also return Thursday for the formal interview?" "Of course," Alexander replied, then turned to Sarah. "Listen, since you've apparently saved my sanity twice in 3 days, how about a coffee?" As a thank you. Sarah hesitated. There was something about this man that made her nervous, and not just because he was rich and powerful. It was the way he seemed genuinely lost when it came to caring for his daughter, yet tried so hard to get everything right. "I'm not sure," she began. "Please," Alexander said with a half-smile. "I need the company of someone who speaks in full sentences and doesn't drool on my shirt." Lily picked that exact moment to drool on his shirt. Sarah burst out laughing. All right, she said, still laughing, but only because she's got perfect comedic timing. Great. Alexander looked genuinely relieved. I know a place nearby that's stroller-friendly and doesn't judge food stains on expensive clothes. How specific? Sarah said as she picked up her folder. Do you go to a lot of places like that? Lately, they're the only ones I go to, he admitted, pushing the stroller. My social life now revolves around nap schedules and places with diaper-changing tables. Welcome to the real world. Sarah laughed. It's not as glamorous, but it's more honest. As they walked together down the hallway, Sarah couldn't help but think how strange life was. 2 days ago, she was just an anonymous passenger trying to read in peace. Now she was heading to have coffee with a millionaire who carried diapers in his bag and talked about nap routines. Can I ask you something? Sarah said when they reached the front door. Sure. Why don't you just hire another nanny right away? I mean, you probably have the resources for that. Alexander paused for a moment, looking at Lily, who was playing with a colorful plastic toy. Because, he sighed, she turned down the last 3. And honestly, I didn't really trust them either. It's hard to leave your daughter with someone you barely know. Sarah felt a tug in her chest. There was something so vulnerable in the way he said that, so different from the confident CEO image. I understand, she said softly. Besides, he added, my daughter seems to have very specific preferences when it comes to caregivers. Lily, as if she knew she was being praised, giggled and waved at Sarah. She definitely knows how to win people over. Sarah smiled. Harrington family, Alexander said, pushing the stroller down the sidewalk. Irresistible charm is a genetic trait. Modesty, too, apparently, Sarah replied dryly. Alexander laughed a real laugh, not the polite kind she imagined he used in business meetings. You'll find out, Sarah Thompson. Modesty isn't exactly one of my strengths. What a surprising revelation, she murmured, but she was smiling. When they arrived at the cafe, Sarah realized that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about interviews, jobs, or the stack of bills waiting for her at home. She was just present in the moment with this strange man and his sweet daughter who had somehow made her day a whole lot more interesting. And for some reason, it didn't scare her as much as it probably should. The next day, after handing out more resumes, Sarah was arriving at her apartment when she saw the envelope stuck to her door. For a moment, her heart jumped with hope. Maybe it was a positive response from a job interview. But when she tore it open, reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. Eviction notice. 15 days to vacate the property. Perfect, she muttered, leaning against the hallway wall. Just perfect. Sarah read the letter 3 times as if the words might magically turn into something less catastrophic. 3 months behind on rent. She knew this day was coming, but she'd always managed to delay it with vague promises to the landlord about payments coming soon. 15 days, she repeated to herself as she climbed the stairs. In 15 days, I'll be living under a bridge, talking to pigeons and begging for coffee money. When she walked into the tiny apartment she called home, Sarah dropped onto the worn-out couch and looked around. There wasn't much to pack anyway. Her belongings could fit in 2 suitcases and a few cardboard boxes. What really worried her was where she'd go. Her family lived in Texas, and going back there would mean admitting New York had been a huge mistake. Her friends were all just as broke or living with 3 roommates in apartments the size of closets. Maybe I can negotiate with the landlord, she said out loud, though she knew full well that Mr. Wilson had the heart of a rock and the flexibility of a brick. The sound of her phone interrupted her worries. An email. Sarah opened it without much interest, expecting another automatic rejection. Dear Miss Thompson, due to yesterday's inconvenience, we'd like to reschedule your interview for today at 2 p.m. Sincerely, Riverside Community Library. Sarah looked at the clock. Chardin Schufen. If she hurried, she could make it on time. Well, she said, standing up from the couch. At least I can be rejected in person instead of by email. 2 hours later, Sarah walked out of the library with a stunned smile and the feeling that the universe was playing a joke on her. She'd gotten the job. Children's section coordinator, decent salary, benefits included. The only catch, she wouldn't start for 30 days. 30 days, she muttered, walking down the sidewalk. "I've got 15 days to find a place to live, and 30 days before I start earning money. The math is not working in my favor." That's when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Sarah. This is Alexander. Alexander Harrington." "Oh." She stopped walking. "Hi. How did you get my number?" "Mrs. Jenkins gave it to me." "Listen, I know this might sound strange, but can I meet with you? I have a proposal you might be interested in." Sarah looked around as if someone might be filming this surreal moment. "What kind of proposal?" "Work-related. Can you meet me at the coffee shop we went to yesterday? Let's say in an hour." Sarah hesitated. "All right, but if you're planning to pitch me some pyramid scheme or sell me vitamins, I'm out." Alexander laughed on the other end. "I promise, no vitamins involved." An hour later, Sarah met Alexander at the same coffee shop, this time without Lily, and with a nervous look she hadn't seen before. "Where's your personal assistant?" Sarah asked as she sat down. "Lily's with my secretary," Alexander said, running his hand through his hair. "It's temporary. Very temporary. Let me guess." Sarah leaned in. "Your secretary didn't sign up for this. She's thinking of quitting," he admitted. "Apparently, market analysis doesn't include diaper duty." Sarah laughed. "I can imagine. So, what's this mysterious proposal?" Alexander took a deep breath. "I heard you won't start at the library for 30 days, and I need help with Lily. Just temporary, 2 weeks at most, while I find a proper nanny. In return, I'll offer you a place to stay and fair pay." Sarah blinked several times. "You want me to live in your house and take care of your daughter?" she asked, making sure she heard correctly. "When you say it like that, it sounds like a weird internet ad," Alexander admitted. "But yes, that's basically it." Sarah looked at him like she was trying to solve a very complicated puzzle. "And why do you think I'd agree to this?" "Because..." Alexander leaned forward. "You managed to get my daughter to stop crying in 5 minutes. And you seem to be the only person she actually likes besides me." "And you?" "Me?" "What, do you like me?" Sarah asked, then blushed deeply. "I mean, do you trust me enough to leave your daughter in my care?" Alexander smiled. Not the polite executive smile, but something more real. "Sarah, you walked through a first-class curtain to help a stranger with a crying child. You didn't ask for anything in return. That tells me more about your character than any reference ever could." Sarah thought about it. On one hand, it was completely crazy. On the other, she was about to be evicted and didn't have many options. 2 weeks? 2 weeks, and I'd have my own room. You'd have your own wing, Alexander replied. The house is big. All right, Sarah said at last. But if Lily decides she doesn't like me anymore, the deal's off. Fair. And if you decide I'm a terrible stand-in nanny, not going to happen. How can you be so sure? Because, Alexander reached out to shake on it. My daughter has excellent judgment. The next day, Sarah stood in front of a house that looked like it came out of an architecture magazine. Perfect lawn, a 3-car garage, and a fountain. An actual fountain right at the entrance. He wasn't kidding about the house being big, she murmured, carrying her 2 suitcases. Alexander opened the door before she even rang the bell. Welcome to organized chaos, he said, grabbing one of her bags. Lily has decided today is the day to reject all food that isn't mashed potatoes. Great, Sarah said with a nervous laugh. The first dinner was without a doubt a comedy of errors. Sarah was so nervous she spilled a full glass of water all over the marble kitchen floor. Alexander tried to be the perfect host. But Lily had other plans. Just as he bent down to clean up the water, she flung a spoonful of mashed potatoes straight onto his Italian suit. Lily, he exclaimed, looking down at the orange stain on his chest. Sarah burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. The whole scene was just so absurd. Her on the floor trying to mop up the water with paper napkins. Him with mashed potatoes dripping down his tie, and Lily clapping her hands like she had just seen the best show of her life. Alexander looked at Sarah laughing, then at Lily clapping, and finally started laughing too. A genuine contagious laugh that filled the elegant kitchen. Welcome to the most dysfunctional family in New York, Sarah said, between laughs. Hey, Alexander protested, still chuckling. We're just creatively disorganized. That night, After bath time and several failed attempts to put Lily to bed, the little one refused to stay in her crib. She cried every time Alexander tried to lay her down, reaching her arms towards Sarah and only calming down when she was in her arms. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, clearly exhausted. "She's never been like this before." "It's okay," Sarah said, rocking Lily gently and humming quietly. "Sometimes changes make kids feel uncertain." Alexander watched silently as Lily slowly relaxed in Sarah's arms, her eyes gradually closing. There was something about that scene, Sarah, softly humming, Lily finally at peace. The soft light from the lamp casting a warm glow that made something tighten in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered when Sarah finally managed to lay Lily in the crib without waking her. "You're welcome," Sarah whispered back. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Sarah." As Sarah was almost to her bedroom door, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and made a face. "Mom," she answered, trying to keep her voice low. "Sarah, honey, I have wonderful news. I'm coming to visit tomorrow. Send me your address." Sarah closed her eyes and leaned against the wall. "Mom, tomorrow's not a great day." "Nonsense. I already bought the ticket. I arrive at 2:00 the afternoon. I can't wait to see your little apartment." The call ended before Sarah could object. She stood in the hallway staring at the phone like it was something from another planet. "Little apartment," she muttered. "That's going to be interesting to explain." A few minutes later, Sarah sent her mother Alexander's address. Now, she just had to figure out how to explain to her mom that she was living with a millionaire and taking care of a child who wasn't hers. "One thing at a time, Sarah," she whispered to herself. "One thing at a time." The next day, Sarah was tidying up her room when she heard the doorbell. She ran to the window and saw a taxi parked in front of the mansion. A woman with gray hair and a purse the size of a small suitcase was paying the driver. "My mom," Sarah whispered, feeling panic rise. "She really came." Sarah rushed down the stairs, finding Alexander in the living room with Lily in his arms, both looking curious about the commotion. "My mom's here," Sarah announced, trying to fix her hair. "I tried to cancel, but she—" The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. "Just breathe," Alexander said calmly. "We'll just explain everything." "You don't know my mother," Sarah muttered as she walked to the door. "She has her own theories about everything." Sarah opened the door and was immediately pulled into a hug that smelled like floral perfume and motherly determination. "Sarah, my darling." "Mrs." Thompson stepped back, holding her daughter's face. "You look different. Are you eating well?" "Hi, Mom," Sarah said with a forced smile. "What a surprise to see you here." "Surprise? I told you I was coming." "Mrs." Thompson looked over Sarah's shoulder, and her eyes went wide. "Oh my goodness, Sarah. You didn't tell me you had a boyfriend." Sarah turned to see Alexander standing at the entrance of the living room, still holding Lily, his face a mix of politeness and panic. "Mom, no, he's not. And do you have a baby?" "Mrs." Thompson practically shouted, walking into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Sarah Marie Thompson, when were you going to tell me I'm a grandmother? I know it's been over a year since we saw each other, but you could have said something. I would have brought presents for my granddaughter." "Mrs. Thompson." Alexander stepped forward, trying to stay composed. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm Alexander Harrington, and this is my daughter, Lily." "Sarah is just Alexander, Mrs." Thompson interrupted, reaching out her hand with energy. "What a strong name. And just look at this house. Sarah, you didn't tell me you had found yourself a man with money." Sarah buried her face in her hands. "Mom, please let me explain." "There's no need to explain anything, dear." "Mrs." Thompson said, winking at Alexander. "Young man, I hope your intentions with my daughter are serious. She may seem shy, but she's got a strong personality when she wants to." I'm sure," Alexander replied, completely lost. Lily chose that moment to stretch her little arms towards Sarah, babbling happily. "Look at that, Mrs." Thompson clapped her hands. "The baby recognizes her mommy. How precious." "Mom, she's not mine," Sarah said quickly, picking Lily up. "Mom, please sit down. I'll explain everything." 20 minutes later, After a confusing explanation involving dramatic hand gestures from Sarah and polite attempts at clarification from Alexander, Mrs. Thompson finally got the picture, more or less. "So, you're a temporary nanny," she said, looking suspiciously between Sarah and Alexander. "And the two of you are not dating." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Yet?" Mrs. Thompson murmured, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, what?" "I'm just pointing out that you look at each other in a very interesting way." Alexander cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe I should start dinner." "Great idea," Mrs. Thompson stood up. "I'll help. I've always wanted to see a millionaire's kitchen." Dinner was a cinematic-level disaster. Mrs. Thompson asked questions ranging from slightly awkward to completely invasive, always at a volume loud enough to be heard in the next county. "So, Alexander," she said, while cutting her chicken with determination, "Sarah told me you lost your wife. I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Alexander answered quietly. "How long has it been?" "Mom?" Sarah warned. 2 years. Alexander replied. "Ah, so you're past the official mourning period," Mrs. Thompson announced. "Good to know you're ready to move on." Sarah nearly choked on her water. "That's not exactly how it works, Mom." "Of course it is. Dear, I read in Modern Living magazine that 2 years is the ideal time to recover from a loss and be ready for a new relationship." Alexander stopped eating entirely. "And Sarah's always been great with kids." Mrs. Thompson continued, completely unaware of the discomfort she was causing. "When she was little, she looked after every baby in the neighborhood. She has a natural maternal instinct. I can confirm that," Alexander said, looking at Sarah with something she couldn't quite read. "See?" Mrs. Thompson turned to her daughter. "He already sees your good qualities. That's a good sign." Sarah buried her face in her hands again. "Mom, you're embarrassing everyone." "Nonsense. I'm just being friendly." Lily, who had been quiet for most of dinner, decided it was time to share her thoughts on the situation. She banged her little spoon on the table and let out a high-pitched squeal of joy. "See?" Mrs. Thompson beamed. "Even the baby agrees with me." After what felt like hours, Mrs. Thompson finally announced it was time to go back to her hotel. Sarah walked her to the taxi, promising to visit the next day. "He's a good man, Sarah," her mother said, adjusting her purse. "And it's obvious you like each other." "Mom, we barely know each other." "Nonsense. I saw the way you looked at each other during dinner and the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." She shook her head. "Reminds me of the way your father used to look at me." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "Mom, just don't let fear get in the way, sweetheart. Sometimes the best things in life show up when we least expect them." After the taxi drove off, Sarah returned home and found Alexander in the kitchen washing dishes with a thoughtful look on his face. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "My mom can be a lot. She's interesting." Alexander smiled gently. "And clearly cares about you a great deal." "Sometimes I think she cares too much," Sarah said, grabbing a dish towel to help, "especially when it comes to my non-existent love life." "Non-existent?" Sarah blushed. "Well, not exactly non-existent. More like complicated or non-existent because of the complications." Alexander chuckled softly. "I understand completely." They worked in silence for a few minutes, an oddly intimate atmosphere settling in between them. Sarah realized that despite the chaos at dinner, something had shifted. Her mom's awkward questions had sparked a conversation they might never have had otherwise. "Alexander," Sarah said at last, drying the final plate, "can I ask about Lily's mom?" He stopped washing the pan, his hands still in the soapy water. "Emma," he said softly. "Her name was Emma. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." Actually, he turned off the faucet and faced her. "I think I need to. No one's ever asked. Everyone acts like she never existed." Sarah set the dish towel on the counter and waited. "She died during childbirth," Alexander said, his voice barely a whisper. "Complications no one saw coming. 1 minute she was holding my hand, laughing about the name we chose for Lily, and the next his voice broke. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and touched his hand. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to take care of a baby," he went on, staring at their hands. I didn't know how to be a father on my own. I thought if I hired the best nannies, provided the best of everything, it would be enough. But Lily rejected everyone until you showed up." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "You're doing a wonderful job. Anyone can see how much you love her. Sometimes I'm afraid it's not enough," Alexander admitted. And for the first time since Sarah met him, his voice trembled. "That she'll grow up missing something I can never give her." "Alexander," Sarah squeezed his hand, "love is enough, and you have plenty of love to give." That's when the tears came, quiet tears that ran down Alexander's face, speaking of 2 years of buried pain, of sleepless nights wondering if he was doing everything wrong, of a loss he had never fully allowed himself to process. Sarah didn't say a word. She just stayed there, holding his hand, letting him feel what he needed to feel. When he finally composed himself, they moved to the back porch. The night was clear, stars visible even with the city lights. "Thank you," Alexander said, sitting beside her on the wooden swing. "For what?" "For letting me talk about her. For not trying to comfort me with cliches." "We all need to talk about the people we love," Sarah replied, "even when they're no longer here." They sat in silence for a while, the swing gently moving. Sarah was aware of every breath he took, the way the porch light cast shadows across his face, the way his presence made her feel safe and vulnerable all at once. "Sarah," Alexander finally said. "Yes? I'm glad you walked through that curtain on the plane." She smiled. "So am I." "Well, I think it's late. I'll head to my room." Alexander simply nodded. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of tense voices coming from Alexander's office. She went downstairs and found the door slightly open, letting fragments of the conversation reach her. "What do you mean the contract was canceled?" Alexander's voice was tight. "We had an agreement." Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to walk away or see if he needed anything. Her decision was made when she heard the sound of something hitting the desk. 6 months of work, Alexander continued on the phone. 6 months, and they suddenly decide they want another supplier. Sarah gently knocked on the door and stepped in. Alexander looked at her, phone still to his ear, with a mix of anger and worry on his face. "We'll talk about this later," he said into the phone and hung up. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. Alexander ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she now recognized as a sign of stress. "Work issues," he said simply. "Nothing you need to worry about." "But Sarah..." Sarah could see it in the tension in his shoulders, in the way he stared at the paper scattered across the desk. It was far more serious than he let on, and for some reason that worried her more than she wanted to admit. In the following days, the house that had become a warm, welcoming refuge began to feel more like an emergency office. Alexander had turned the dining room into a command center, with papers spread across every surface and 3 phones ringing at intervals that seemed designed to create maximum stress. Sarah watched all of it while trying to keep Lily entertained on the living room rug away from the growing chaos. The little girl seemed to sense the tension in the air. She was fussier than usual, refusing to eat properly, and waking up several times during the night. "No, no, and no." Alexander's voice echoed down the hallway. "I don't care if they want to renegotiate. The original deal was perfectly fine." Sarah winced and turned to Lily, who was chewing on a rubber toy with a puzzled look on her face. "Your daddy's having a tough time at work," she said softly. "But don't worry. He'll be okay." As if she disagreed with Sarah's hopeful statement, Lily spit out the toy and started to whimper. I know," Sarah said, picking her up. "You're feeling the tension, too. How about we read a book?" But even Lily's favorite story about the adventurous bunny couldn't compete with the rising volume of Alexander's voice coming from the dining room. "What do you mean you need 3 more weeks to decide?" he shouted. "This project should have been done yesterday." Sarah sighed. Over the past 3 days, Alexander had become an intensified version of himself, waking up at 5 inches the morning to call international suppliers, glued to the phone all day, barely eating. Whenever Sarah tried to bring him a sandwich, all she got was a distracted nod of thanks. She didn't know anything about corporate business, but she did understand people under pressure, and Alexander was clearly reaching his limit. Sarah placed Lily in the playpen and walked to the home library, an impressive room with bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling. She scanned the shelves until she found what she was looking for. A section of books on management and leadership, most with serious covers and intimidating titles. Perfect, she muttered, picking out 2 books she remembered reading back when she worked at the public library in Texas. One was about crisis management, and the other about leading under pressure. Sarah returned to the dining room and found Alexander on the phone, waving at a spreadsheet in frustration. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly, placing the books on the table beside him. Alexander glanced at the books, then at her, looking confused. "Books? They're about crisis management," Sarah explained quickly. "I read them when I was studying library science. There might be some helpful strategies in them." "Sarah," Alexander said, covering the phone with his hand, "I appreciate the thought, but I don't have time to read children's stories about business right now." Sarah blinked, surprised by the sharpness in his voice. "These are serious books written by We'll talk about it later," he said, already turning back to the call. "Yes, I'm still here." "No, that's not acceptable." Sarah stood there for a moment, feeling strangely small. Then she picked up the books and walked out of the room. The next day, things only got worse. Lily woke up crying at 5:00 the morning, refused breakfast, and spilled juice all over the clean clothes Sarah had just put on her. Meanwhile, Alexander was already on the phone before brushing his teeth, his voice echoing through the house like a constant drumbeat of frustration. "It can't be that hard to find a new supplier," he yelled, storming through the kitchen. "Do the research. Do your job." Sarah was trying to convince Lily to eat at least 1 bite of oatmeal when the little one decided it was more fun to throw the food on the floor. Just as Sarah bent down to clean up the mess, Alexander walked into the kitchen. "Sarah, have you seen my contract with Morrison Industries?" It was on the living room table, but he stopped suddenly when he saw the oatmeal all over the floor and Lily with messy hands laughing at her own mischief. "Seriously?" he snapped. "You can't even keep a 2-year-old clean during breakfast." Sarah stood up slowly, cleaning rags still in hand, and looked at him with a mix of shock and disbelief. "Excuse me?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Alexander ran a hand through his hair. "It's just that I've been looking for that contract for 20 minutes, and you thought it was a good idea to take out your frustration on me?" Sarah interrupted, her voice dangerously calm. That's exactly what it was," Sarah said, placing the rag in the sink harder than necessary. "Lily, sweetie, let's go for a walk." "Sarah, wait." "No." She turned to him. "You clearly need some time to cool off, and the 2 of us need some fresh air." Sarah lifted Lily from the high chair, grabbed the diaper bag, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Alexander standing there like he'd just been struck by lightning. 3 hours later, Sarah returned with Lily asleep in the stroller and a calmer look on her face. She found Alexander sitting on the back porch, staring out at the garden with a cup of cold coffee in his hands. "Sarah," he stood as soon as he saw her. Before you say anything," Sarah said, locking the stroller brake, "I need to say a few things." Alexander nodded, looking like he was ready to take a well-deserved scolding. "I understand you're under pressure," Sarah began, sitting on the porch swing. "I get that losing an important contract is stressful and that you feel responsible for a lot of people. But what you can't do is treat the people around you like tools that exist only to make your life easier." "You're right," Alexander said immediately. "I was completely unfair." "I'm not finished," Sarah raised her hand. "You have this habit of treating everything like a problem to solve, including people. Your secretary isn't a computer you can reprogram. Lily isn't a project you can optimize, and I'm not an employee you can scold when things don't go as planned." Alexander sat heavily in the chair next to her. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." "Why do you do that?" Sarah asked, her voice softer. "Now, why do you need to control everything?" Alexander was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because I'm scared," he finally admitted. "I'm scared that if I don't keep everything under control, it'll all fall apart. The company, my ability to take care of Lily, everything. And when did someone tell you that you had to manage everything on your own?" "Since Emma died," his voice came out as a whisper. "Everyone just looked at me, waiting for me to know what to do. The lawyers, the doctors, the employees, everyone assumed I had a plan, so I pretended I did." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. "Alexander, you don't have to pretend with me." "I know." He looked at her. "It's just hard to stop. After 2 years of acting like you're in control, you forget what it's like to admit you're not. Can I tell you a secret? Sarah leaned forward. No one's really in control. Everyone's just making it up as they go and hoping for the best. Alexander laughed, a broken but genuine sound. That's both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Welcome to adulthood. Sarah smiled. Population. Everybody pretending they know what they're doing. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching Lily sleep peacefully in her stroller. About those books you suggested, Alexander finally said, do you really think they could help? I don't know, Sarah answered honestly. But what you're doing now clearly isn't working. Maybe it's worth trying something different. Can you show me which ones? Sarah smiled. Sure, but first you're going to take a shower, eat something that's not coffee, and spend at least an hour playing with your daughter without thinking about work. That sounds dangerously close to not being in control. Exactly. Sarah stood up. Let's see if you can survive it. Later that night, Sarah found Alexander in the library, leaning over one of the books she had recommended. She brought him a cup of tea and set it beside him. Anything interesting? Actually, yes. He looked up, surprised. This chapter on effective delegation, I never thought about it this way. What do you mean? The author talks about the difference between delegating tasks and delegating authority. I always delegate tasks, but I never really let people make decisions. Sarah sat in the armchair next to the table. And does that make sense to you? Unfortunately, it makes a lot of sense, Alexander. I think I just figured out why my team calls me for everything. I never really let them handle anything on their own. Then maybe it's time to start trusting them. Alexander closed the book and looked at her. How did you get so wise about things that aren't even in your field? Librarians read a lot, Sarah smiled. And we watch people. You learn that most human problems are just variations of the same few themes. And what's my basic theme? Sarah thought about the question carefully. Fear of not being enough. So, you try to make up for it by being everything to everyone. The simplicity of the observation hit him like a punch in the stomach. That's uncomfortably accurate. The good news is, you don't have to be everything to everyone, Sarah stood. You just need to be a dad to Lily and a boss to your company. And even that doesn't have to be perfect. As Sarah walked upstairs to her room, Alexander stayed in the library for a few more hours reading about leadership strategies he had never considered before. For the first time in days, his mind wasn't spinning in circles of panic. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his own. The next morning, Alexander woke up with a fresh energy Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. He was in the kitchen by 7 a.m., wearing a perfectly pressed dress shirt and holding a cup of coffee like it was a victory trophy. Good morning, he greeted Sarah with a smile. The new nanny, Miss Rebecca, arrives at 9. She has an excellent resume, great references, and experience with difficult children. Sarah, still in her pajamas with hair that looked like it had been through a blender, raised one eyebrow at him. Difficult child? Lily's not difficult, Sarah said. She's just selective. Exactly, Alexander said, picking up a piece of toast. And Rebecca is an expert with selective children. Sarah poured herself some coffee, trying to ignore the strange feeling in her stomach. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? For Alexander to find a proper nanny so she could get back to her own life. I'm sure everything will work out just fine, she said, trying to sound convincing. At exactly 9, the doorbell rang. Sarah was upstairs changing Lily when she heard voices at the entrance. Curious, she stepped closer to the staircase and got a look at the new nanny. Miss Rebecca was everything Sarah wasn't. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a posture that practically shouted professional efficiency. She wore a navy blue suit that looked like it came straight out of a guidebook on how to dress to impress wealthy parents, and carried a leather folder that probably cost more than Sarah's old apartment rent. Sarah came down the stairs with Lily in her arms, who immediately buried her face in Sarah's neck at the sight of the stranger. Miss Rebecca, this is Sarah. And this little one is Lily, Alexander said, making the introductions. Pleasure to meet you, Rebecca said, offering Sarah a polished smile and a firm handshake. I hear you've been filling in here temporarily. You must be eager to get back to your regular life. Sarah shook her hand. trying to figure out whether there was a hint of sarcasm in that comment. "Well, Sarah's been wonderful," Alexander interrupted, "but I know she has her own plans." Lily chose that exact moment to peek at Rebecca from over Sarah's shoulder, eyeing the new candidate with the seriousness of a judge at a beauty pageant. "Hello, Lily," Rebecca said with carefully measured enthusiasm. "Aren't you a little sweetheart?" Lily quickly hid her face again. "She's a bit shy around new people," Sarah explained. "Of course," Rebecca nodded knowingly. "That's perfectly normal. In a few hours, we'll be best friends. Right, Lily?" Lily didn't respond, but Sarah could feel her holding onto her shirt a little tighter. The first 30 minutes went surprisingly well. Rebecca showed off her efficiency by organizing Lily's toys by color and category, explaining to Alexander the benefits of a structured routine, and flipping through her folder full of age-appropriate learning activities. Sarah watched from a distance, trying to convince herself she was glad Alexander had found someone so qualified. But there was something about the way Rebecca spoke about Lily, as if she were a project to manage, not a child to love, that didn't sit right with her. "Now, let's test her reaction to a brief separation," Rebecca announced. "Miss Sarah, would you mind stepping out for a few minutes?" Sarah looked at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," she said, kissing the top of Lily's head. "I'll be right back." The moment Sarah stepped out of the room, the crying began. Not a soft whimper, but a full-blown panic scream that made Sarah freeze on the stairs. "This is normal," she heard Rebecca say. "She needs to learn how to handle transitions." But the crying didn't stop. It kept going and going and going. 15 minutes later, Sarah couldn't take it anymore and went back into the room. She found Lily on the floor, her face red from crying, arms outstretched toward the door. Rebecca was seated in an armchair, checking a stopwatch like it was part of a science experiment. Sarah rushed over and Lily practically jumped into her arms. "It's all right, sweetheart." "Miss Sarah," Rebecca said, offering a tight smile. "This doesn't help the adaptation process." "The process can wait 5 minutes," Sarah replied, gently rocking Lily until her sobs faded. The next day, things didn't get better. Lily flat out refused to eat anything Rebecca offered, cried every time she got close, and developed the habit of chasing Sarah around the house. "She just needs time," Alexander kept saying, though Sarah could see the concern growing in his eyes. "Of course," Rebecca agreed, scribbling something into her little notebook. "Initial resistance is common in spoiled children." Sarah stopped folding Lily's clothes. "Spoiled?" "Well, yes," Rebecca said, adjusting her glasses. "It's clear she's been overindulged and hasn't learned proper boundaries." "She's 2, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Exactly the age when firm boundaries need to be introduced." Sarah looked at Lily, who was playing quietly on the floor, and wondered if she and Rebecca were even talking about the same child. The next afternoon, while Sarah was in her room organizing a few things, she heard a soft knock at the door. She opened it to find Lily standing there, arms raised with a look that clearly said, "Please get me out of the situation." "Hi, sweetheart," Sarah said as she picked her up. "What are you doing here?" "Mama," Lily said, pointing down the hallway as if explaining that she had escaped from a particularly unpleasant situation. Sarah carried Lily over to the bedroom window where they could see Rebecca in the garden, talking on the phone with an exasperated look on her face. "Looks like you two aren't getting along very well," Sarah murmured. "Mama," Lily agreed, resting her head on Sarah's shoulder. The next day, the conflict finally reached its limit. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing an afternoon snack when she heard raised voices coming from the living room. "No, Lily." Rebecca's voice was clearly irritated. "You can't just reject all healthy food." Sarah walked closer to the doorway and saw Lily sitting on the floor, arms crossed, staring at Rebecca with a defiant expression that would have been impressive on a 10-year-old, let alone a 2-year-old. "Lily, you're going to eat this carrot or we're going to have to talk about consequences," Rebecca went on. Lily pushed the plate away. "This child is impossible," Rebecca sighed, turning and noticing Sarah at the door. "Miss Sarah, could you please explain to Lily that tantrums are not acceptable?" "Actually," Sarah stepped into the room, "I think she's just expressing her preferences." "Preferences?" Rebecca repeated as if the word were a foreign concept. She's 2 years old. She eats what the adults decide she should eat. Or, Sarah said, crouching down to Lily's level, we could ask what kind of snack she'd like today. That's exactly the kind of permissiveness that leads to manipulative behavior, Rebecca said, crossing her arms. Sarah felt a warm rush rise in her chest. Manipulative behavior. It's obvious she's learned to get what she wants by creating a scene. She's a spoiled and manipulative child. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the front door opening. Alexander had arrived home from work, and from the sound of his quick steps, he had heard at least part of the conversation. "What's going on here?" he asked as he entered the room. "I was just explaining to Miss Sarah the importance of Rebecca started. She called Lily spoiled and manipulative." Sarah cut in, picking the little girl up. Alexander went very quiet. She said, "What?" "Mr. Harrington, I was simply pointing out that Rebecca tried to explain." "Leave," Alexander said, his voice dangerously calm. "Excuse me? Leave my house now." "Mr. Harrington, if I may explain." "There's nothing to explain," he said, his voice rising slightly. "No one calls my daughter manipulative. Get your things and go." Rebecca looked from Alexander to Sarah, then to Lily, as if trying to understand how things had escalated so quickly. "Very well," she said, adjusting her briefcase with wounded dignity. "But you'll see that excessive spoiling is not real love. And you'll learn that judging a 2-year-old isn't professionalism," Alexander replied, opening the living room door meaningfully. After Rebecca left, a strange silence fell over the room. Lily, who had watched the whole scene with wide eyes, suddenly smiled and clapped her hands as if she'd just watched a particularly entertaining performance. "Well," Sarah said finally, "that was something." Alexander ran his hands through his hair. "Sarah, I need to ask you a favor." "Of course. Would you stay permanently?" As Lily's nanny, Sarah looked at him, then at Lily, who was still smiling in her arms. "Alexander, I'm supposed to start at the library in 5 days. I'll pay 3 times the library salary," he said quickly. "And you can keep living here. Your own wing, remember?" Sarah thought for a moment. It was a generous offer. Very generous, but it would mean giving up the library job and the plans she had made for her life. "It's a tempting offer," she said at last. "So, you'll stay?" Sarah looked at Lily, who chose that moment to plant a loud, exaggerated kiss on her cheek, making them both laugh. "All right," Sarah sighed. "I'll call the library tomorrow." "Really?" "Really? But if you hire another Rebecca, I'm running out the door. No more nannies," Alexander promised. "Only you." That night, after putting Lily to bed, Sarah found Alexander in the kitchen pouring 2 glasses of wine. "To celebrate," he said, handing her one. "Celebrate what?" "The fact that I gave up my career plans to be a full-time nanny. To celebrate that my daughter finally has someone who truly understands her," he replied, raising his glass. They clinked their glasses gently, and Sarah realized she was standing closer to him than necessary. Close enough to notice he was wearing expensive cologne, close enough to see the small wrinkles around his eyes when he smiled. "Sarah," Alexander said, placing his glass on the counter. "Yes?" "Thank you for staying, for caring for her as if she were mine," Sarah finished softly. He nodded, and suddenly the space between them seemed filled with an electricity. Sarah didn't quite know how to interpret. Alexander leaned in slightly toward her, and she realized she wasn't moving away. "Sarah," he whispered. "Yes?" But before either of them could decide what to do at that moment, a sharp cry echoed through the baby monitor. "Lily," they said at the same time, quickly stepping apart. "I'll go," Sarah said, already heading for the stairs. "Sarah," Alexander called. She turned. "Good night." "Good night, Alexander." As she climbed the stairs to comfort Lily, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the moment that had almost happened in the kitchen. And more troubling, the fact that a part of her wished Lily hadn't woken up. Some things were more complicated than they seemed, and her new job as a nanny was quickly becoming one of them. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened in Alexander Harrington's life. He began putting into practice the strategies from the books Sarah had recommended, and the results were surprisingly positive. Instead of micromanaging every decision, he started giving his team real authority. When a supplier canceled a contract, instead of panicking, he gathered his staff and simply said, "You know what to do. I trust you." The effect was almost magical. His secretary stopped thinking about quitting. His team began solving problems without bombarding him with frantic phone calls. And to his surprise, the company didn't just recover. It started thriving in ways he hadn't seen in years. "You seem different," Sarah said one morning, finding him in the kitchen making pancakes. Real pancakes, not just coffee and anxiety. Different how? Less like someone who's always waiting for the world to catch fire. Alexander laughed, flipping a pancake with more confidence than she expected. "Maybe it's because I've learned that sometimes the world will catch fire, and that doesn't mean I have to be the only firefighter around." "Look at you being philosophical before 8 a.m. Sarah smiled, settling Lily into her high chair. "That's progress." Lily clapped her hands when she saw the pancakes, letting out a happy squeal that made them both laugh. "Actually," Sarah said, pouring orange juice, "I was thinking maybe it's time for us to get out of the house a little. When's the last time you two went to a park?" Alexander paused mid-pour, the batter still dripping from the ladle. "A park?" "Yes. You know, grass, trees, kids running around. Very popular among people with small children." "I know what a park is," he said, sounding slightly offended. "It's just that, well, I've never thought about taking Lily to one." "Why not?" Alexander thought for a moment as he stacked the pancakes on a plate. "I suppose I always saw parks as places where things could go wrong. Lily might get hurt or eat sand or have fun, get exercise and have normal childhood experiences." "That too," he admitted with a smile. "All right, let's try this park thing." 2 hours later, they were at Central Park with a picnic basket Sarah had packed, and Lily wearing a little yellow dress that made her look like a tiny ray of sunshine. "See," Sarah said, laying out a blanket under a tree. "The world didn't end just because we left the house." "The day is still young," Alexander muttered, but he was smiling. Lily, who had been quiet during the short walk to their perfect spot, suddenly lit up at the sight of other kids playing nearby. She pointed toward the playground, babbling something that sounded like a mix of go and now. "Looks like someone has an opinion about our plans." Sarah laughed. "All right, little one." Alexander stood up and held out his arms to Lily. "Let's explore." What followed were 2 of the most enjoyable hours either of them had had in a long time. Lily discovered that sand was fascinating to dig in, that slides were exciting, and that ice cream, bought from a street vendor, was clearly the best invention ever. The problem with the ice cream became clear about 10 minutes after they bought it, when Lily decided it was more fun to smear the treat all over her clothes than actually eat it. "No, Lily," Sarah said, trying to wipe the little girl's face with a napkin. "Ice cream goes in your mouth, not on your dress." But Lily had other ideas. She laughed and rubbed her sticky hands through her hair, turning her blonde curls into what looked like an abstract artwork made of strawberry and vanilla. "Well," Alexander said, taking pictures with his phone, "at least she's having fun, says the man who won't be giving her a bath later." Sarah replied, but she was laughing too. The scene became even funnier when Lily, apparently tired of standing still to be cleaned up, decided to make a run for the playground. Sarah jumped up to follow her, but didn't notice that the blanket was caught under the picnic basket. The result was a spectacular stumble that left her sitting in the grass with a completely stunned expression. "Very graceful," she muttered to herself, pulling leaves out of her hair. Alexander couldn't hold it in. He laughed, a genuine, loud, contagious laugh as he helped Sarah back to her feet. "You okay?" "My dignity took a hit, but physically I'm fine," Sarah replied, brushing the grass off her clothes. "Now, where's our little runaway?" They found Lily at the slide, still sticky with ice cream, but glowing with joy. Alexander kept snapping pictures. Lily on the swing, Sarah gently pushing her. Lily feeding ducks at the pond with more bread landing in the water than reaching the ducks. The 3 of them lying on the blanket, looking up at the sky and imagining shapes in the clouds. "That one looks like an elephant." Sarah pointed to one especially fluffy cloud. "I see a giant bunny." Alexander disagreed. "Papa," Lily chimed in, pointing to a completely different cloud. She's clearly right. Sarah laughed. That's definitely a papa. When they got back home in the late afternoon, they were all tired, a little messy, and oddly happy. Lily had fallen asleep in the stroller on the walk back, with traces of ice cream still behind her ears. That was, Alexander began, carrying the empty picnic basket, chaotic, messy, completely unlike anything I'd usually plan. Perfect, he finished. I was going to say perfect. Sarah smiled, feeling something warm spread through her chest. Dinner? Leave it to me, Alexander said confidently. I can cook. Are you sure? Because I've got numbers for at least 3 takeout places. Absolutely sure, he interrupted. How hard can it be? 45 minutes later, Sarah was sitting on the kitchen floor laughing until tears ran down her face while Alexander tried to wave away the smoke pouring from the oven. I said I could cook, he said, looking at what used to be lasagna. I didn't say I was good at it. It's artistic charcoal, Sarah managed to say through her laughter. Very modern. Very burnt, Alexander corrected, joining her on the floor. Pizza, she agreed. While they waited for the delivery, they stayed on the kitchen floor, Lily playing between them with colorful blocks. And Sarah realized that this simple, unglamorous moment was the closest she had ever felt to being home. Sarah, Alexander said suddenly, can I show you something? Of course. He got up and returned a few minutes later with a wooden box Sarah had never seen before. These are letters, Emma wrote, he explained, sitting next to her again. Some for me. Some for Lily. Sarah looked at the box like it was something precious and fragile. Do you read them? The ones to me? Yes, sometimes. But there's one she wrote for Lily to open when she's older, and I've never been able to read it. Why not? Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching Lily stack her blocks with serious focus. Because once I read it, she's really gone. As long as there's something of hers I haven't read, it feels like there's still one more conversation to have. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. But Alexander, maybe the point isn't to end a conversation. Maybe it's to start something new. He looked at her, then at the box, then at Lily. Would you read it with me? If you want me to. With slightly trembling hands, Alexander opened the envelope marked, For my little Lily, when you're old enough to understand. The letter was short, written in Emma's delicate handwriting, full of love and hope for a daughter she never got the chance to meet. It talked about dreams she had for Lily, how she hoped she would be brave and kind, and how she wanted her to know she had been loved even before she was born. At the end, there was one line that made them both cry. And I hope your daddy finds someone wonderful to love you both the way you deserve. Alexander, Sarah whispered, her words barely audible. She knew, he said, his voice thick. Somehow, she knew. Sarah reached out and took his hand, gently interlacing their fingers. She wanted you to be happy. And I do. He turned to look at her. I want to be happy with you. What happened next felt as natural as breathing. Alexander leaned in toward her. Sarah didn't pull away, and when their lips met, it felt like all the scattered pieces of their lives had finally clicked into place. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, then deeper, more certain. Sarah felt like she was both falling and flying, as if everything in her life had led to this exact moment. When they pulled apart, they stayed like that for a moment, breathing in sync, foreheads touching, while Lily played happily at their feet, completely unaware that the world had just changed. Sarah, Alexander began. But before he could continue, the phone rang, loud and persistent, shattering the moment like glass. Alexander looked at the phone, then at Sarah, clearly torn. Answer it, she said softly. It could be important. Harrington, he said into the phone, his voice still a little rough. Sarah watched his expression shift as he listened, relaxed, to focused, to concerned. When? He asked. I can't wait until Monday. I see. Yes, I'll be there tomorrow. He hung up and turned to Sarah with an apologetic look. Problem in Seattle. I need to fly out tomorrow. 2 days, maybe 3. Oh, Sarah said, trying to hide the disappointment in her voice. Sarah. He took her hand again. Would you stay with Lily until I get back? She looked at him, then at Lily, who had just stacked 4 blocks and was clapping for herself. Of course, she said. We'll be fine. Thank you. He kissed her forehead gently. "I'll be back as soon as I can." That night, as Sarah put Lily to bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, about Emma's letter, and about the strange feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Some changes, she thought, come like storms. Others arrive like a kiss in someone's kitchen, soft and as inevitable as the sunset. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of Alexander's cab pulling out of the driveway at 5:30. She stretched in bed, listening to the unusual stillness of the big house, and suddenly it hit her. She was alone with Lily for the next 2 days, completely alone, responsible for a 2-year-old in a mansion that still sometimes felt like a museum. "All right, Sarah," she murmured to herself, slipping on her robe. "How many people take care of kids?" "Millions. Billions. You can do this." The first challenge came 20 minutes later when Lily woke up crying because Daddy wasn't there to say good morning like he always did. "I know, sweetheart." Sarah picked her up and gently rocked her. "Daddy went to work, but he'll be back soon. In the meantime, it's just the two of us, and we have very important plans today." "Dada?" Lily asked, looking around with sleepy eyes. "Daddy's coming back," Sarah promised. "But first, how about some breakfast? And then we can read stories. Lots of stories." The morning turned out to be surprisingly peaceful. Sarah discovered that Lily was a very enthusiastic audience for her character voices, clapping whenever Sarah pretended to be a roaring lion or a hooting owl. They spent a full hour in the library with Lily pointing to different books and Sarah making up stories on the spot just from the pictures on the covers. "And then," Sarah said dramatically, pretending to read a book about a dog. "The brave little dog decided he wanted to fly like a bird." "Woof, woof," Lily added, smiling. "Exactly." "Woof, woof said, 'I'll try and climb the tallest tree he could find.'" It was during the third made-up story that Margaret, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea. "Sorry to interrupt," she said with a warm smile. "I thought you might like a little snack." "Margaret, you're an angel," Sarah sighed. "I was just wondering how I was going to manage lunch without leaving Lily alone." "Miss Sarah?" Margaret set the tray down on the low table. "May I say it's a pleasure to see you with little Lily like this?" "What do you mean?" "Well," Margaret adjusted the napkins neatly. "Mr. Alexander has always been very structured with the girls' routine. Time for this, time for that. But you let her be a child." Sarah looked over at Lily, who was trying to turn the pages of a book upside down. "I'm not entirely sure I know what I'm doing, to be honest." "No one really knows," Margaret said with a soft laugh. "But love always works better than manuals." After lunch, Sarah decided it was time for Lily to learn something new. "How about we learn a song?" she suggested, sitting down at the piano in the music room. Sarah didn't know how to play the piano. Her musical skills were pretty much limited to singing in the shower. But she found she could press a few keys and make a simple melody while she sang. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star," she sang, pressing random keys that sounded vaguely musical. To her surprise and delight, Lily tried to sing along, making melodic sounds that were almost recognizable as music. "Ink, ink," Lily sang, clapping her hands. "That's right," Sarah clapped, too. "You're singing." They spent the whole afternoon creating their own version of classic children's songs with Sarah on her improvised piano and Lily providing enthusiastic, if not always in tune, vocals. Later in the afternoon, Robert, the driver, found the two of them in the kitchen trying to make cookies, or rather Sarah trying to make cookies, while Lily supervised from her high chair, occasionally contributing flour scattered all over the counter. "Need a hand?" he offered, seeing the colorful mess that had once been a spotless kitchen. "Do you know how to make cookies?" Sarah asked, hopeful. "My wife always says I'm better at following recipes than navigating New York traffic." Robert smiled. And that's saying something. With Robert running the operation and Sarah providing constant entertainment for Lily, they managed to bake 24 cookies that were only slightly burned around the edges. "Success," Sarah declared, biting into a warm cookie. "Lily, we've proven we can make edible food." "More or less edible," Robert added with a laugh. The next day, Sarah woke up feeling more confident. She had made it through her first day alone with Lily without any disaster bigger than flour on the kitchen floor. Maybe she actually did know what she was doing. That confidence lasted until 9 that night, when a strong storm swept through New York. Sarah was reading to Lily in her bedroom when she noticed the little girl felt warmer than usual. "Lily," she said, placing her hand on the toddler's forehead and feeling her stomach sink, "you've got a fever." Lily was clearly uncomfortable, crying in a way Sarah had never heard before. Not the usual tired or cranky crying, but something that sounded like real pain. Sarah tried to stay calm. Fevers and children were common. She knew that. But Lily kept getting hotter, and her quiet cries were turning into heartbreaking wails. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, walking around the house with Lily in her arms. "We'll take some medicine and you'll feel better soon." But even after giving her the proper medicine and trying every soothing trick she knew, Lily's fever wouldn't go down and the crying wouldn't stop. Sarah looked at the clock. 10:30 p.m. Alexander was probably asleep, getting ready for his big meeting the next day. She hesitated for a full 5 minutes before dialing his number. "Sarah?" His voice came on, instantly alert. "What's going on?" "Lily has a fever," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "A high one. I gave her medicine, but she won't stop crying and she feels really hot." "How long has it been?" "An hour, maybe an hour and a half." She heard movement on the other end. Alexander getting dressed by the sound of it. "I'm coming home." "Alexander, you don't have to, it's just a fever. I can handle it." "Sarah," his voice was firm but kind. "You two are more important than any meeting. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 2 hours." While she waited, Sarah kept walking around the house with Lily, singing softly, trying anything to calm her down. Margaret came out in her pajamas and robe, offering help and moral support. Robert even showed up, ready to drive them to the hospital if needed. "You don't all have to stay up," Sarah said, overwhelmed. "Miss Sarah," Margaret said firmly, "this family looks after each other. And you're part of this family now." 2 hours later, Sarah heard the sound of a car pulling up quickly in the driveway. Alexander rushed through the front door, still in a wrinkled suit, his hair a mess. "How is she?" he asked, holding out his arms right away. "About the same," Sarah said, handing Lily over and noticing how the little girl calmed slightly at the familiar touch. "Her temperature still high, but it hasn't gone up anymore." Alexander held Lily close against his chest, whispering soft words as he gently felt her forehead. "Hey there, little one," he murmured. "Daddy's here. You're okay now." Sarah watched the way he held Lily, the way his voice softened into something gentle and protective, and she felt a tightness in her chest. He had left an important business meeting, possibly the one that could save the contract they had lost, to come home because his daughter was sick. 2 hours later, Lily's fever finally went down. She was sleeping peacefully in Alexander's arms, breathing softly, her skin finally back to normal temperature. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, looking at Sarah, "for taking care of her, for calling me, for everything. You don't have to thank me for doing my job. This isn't just your job," he said, his voice serious. This is you caring for her like she was your own." Sarah felt her eyes sting with tears. "I do care, probably more than I should." The next day, after Lily woke up completely recovered and full of energy as if nothing had happened, Alexander found Sarah on the porch, sipping coffee and looking out at the garden. "May I sit?" "Of course." They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to Lily play in the living room with Margaret. "About last night," Alexander began. "You missed your important meeting," Sarah said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He turned to look at her. "It got rescheduled, and even if it hadn't, I would have made the same choice." "Why?" "Because the two of you mean more to me than any deal." Sarah felt her heart start to race. "Alexander, Sarah, we need to talk about the future, about what's happening between us." "I know," she sighed, "and I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Of getting too attached," she admitted, "to you, to Lily, to this life, and then finding out it was only temporary." Alexander took her hand. "Sarah, look at me." She turned to his eyes. "I don't want to lose you. Not as Lily's nanny and not as whatever it is we're becoming. Do you understand that?" "I do," she said softly. "But what if things change? What if you meet someone who fits your world better?" "My world," Alexander repeated, smiling gently, "is a house where my daughter laughs, where someone burns dinner and doesn't mind, where I get to be a dad instead of a CEO. That's my world now, and you're right in the center of it." Sarah felt the tears begin to form. "You sure?" "I'm sure. I want to find out where this goes," he said. "If you do too." Sarah looked back at the house behind them, where she could hear Lily laughing with Margaret, at the garden where they'd had picnics, at the man sitting beside her, who had dropped everything to come home when they needed him. "I do," she said finally. "I want to find out, too." Alexander smiled. Not the polished smile of a businessman, but something warm and genuine that made Sarah realize she might have finally found where she truly belonged. "Well," he said, standing up and holding out his hand, "how about we start with breakfast? I promise not to burn anything today." "We'll see." Sarah laughed, taking his hand. "But I'm keeping the pizza place on speed dial just in case." As they walked back into the house together, Sarah realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about the future with anxiety. Instead, she was simply happy to be exactly where she was. In that moment, with the people who had become her family in ways she never could have planned. 2 days later, Sarah thought it would be a good idea to take Lily for a surprise visit to Alexander's office. After all, he had mentioned several times how much he missed his daughter during long workdays. And Lily always got excited when she heard the word Daddy. "Let's go surprise Daddy," Sarah said as she dressed Lily in a pink dress that made her look like a little doll. "Da!" Lily clapped her hands, clearly approving the plan. Alexander's office was on the 32nd floor of a glass and steel skyscraper in downtown New York, with a view that made Sarah feel a little dizzy. The receptionist recognized them immediately and escorted them to his office with warm smiles. "Surprise," Sarah said, appearing in the doorway with Lily in her arms. Alexander's face lit up in a way that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "What a wonderful surprise," he said, standing and reaching out for Lily. "How are my 2 favorite girls?" Sarah felt a strange warmth at the phrase "my 2 girls," but tried not to overthink it. They spent a lovely hour at the office with Lily, fascinated by the skyscrapers she could see through the window, and Alexander clearly more relaxed than Sarah was used to seeing when he was in work mode. A few coworkers stopped by to say hello, all of them commenting on how big Lily had gotten and how obvious it was that she adored Sarah. "I need to get back to a meeting," Alexander said reluctantly. "But how about dinner out tonight? The 3 of us? Sounds perfect." Sarah smiled. "We'll let you get back to work." Sarah was waiting for the elevator with Lily when she heard familiar voices coming from the hallway nearby. 2 women in suits, apparently executives, were talking as they walked. "Is that his new girlfriend?" one of them was asking. "I think so," the other replied. "Pretty, but she seems kind of ordinary." Sarah stopped pressing the elevator button, curious despite herself. "Well, you know Alexander," the first voice continued. "He always gets involved temporarily with employees, then disappears. Remember the marketing assistant and that HR consultant?" "That's right," the second woman laughed. "He has a pattern. A few weeks of romance, then he goes back to being his usual cold CEO self. I bet this one won't last 2 months." Sarah felt her blood run cold. The elevator arrived with a ding, but she could barely move to step inside. "Mama," Lily asked, noticing the sudden change in Sarah's mood. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, but her mind was racing. Employees. He had a pattern. Temporary romance all the way home. The words echoed in Sarah's head. "Is that what I am? Just another woman in a string of temporary flings? The nanny who happened to be convenient for something more?" Sarah tried to convince herself that the women were just gossiping, that they didn't really know anything, but the doubt had been planted, and it grew like a poisonous weed. At dinner that night, Sarah was quieter than usual. Alexander, who had come home cheerful and talking about weekend plans, gradually realized something was wrong. "Are you okay?" he asked. After several attempts at conversation received nothing more than one-word replies. "I'm fine," Sarah said, pushing her food around on the plate. "Sarah." Alexander set down his fork. "You're clearly not fine. What happened?" Sarah looked at him. This man who had come to mean so much to her, and wondered if she was being naive. Was she just a temporary phase in his carefully organized life? "It's about us," she said finally. "What about us?" Maybe I should leave." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander froze, like her words had the power to stop him completely. "You want to leave?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted to shout no, to explain about the women at the office, to hope he would convince her she was wrong. But the scared part, the part that had been hurt before, whispered that it was better to leave before being left behind. "Maybe it's for the best," she said, hating how those words sounded, even coming from her own mouth. Alexander slowly nodded, but Sarah could see something break behind his eyes. "If that's what you want," he said, "I'll respect your decision." "Thank you," Sarah whispered, feeling like she was watching her life fall apart. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a heart as heavy as stone. Alexander had left early for work, leaving only a note saying she could take all the time she needed to get organized. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah began to pack her few belongings. There wasn't much. 2 suitcases, a few boxes of books, and memories from a few months that had completely changed her life. Before leaving, she decided to stop by Alexander's office to leave the keys and say a proper goodbye. But as she walked into the room, something on his desk caught her eye. It was a photo of the 3 of them, Alexander, Sarah, and Lily, taken on the day of the picnic at the park. Lily was sitting on Sarah's lap, covered in ice cream, and the 3 of them were laughing like it was the happiest moment in the world. Sarah turned the photo over and read the message Alexander had written in his handwriting. "The person who made me happy again and brought laughter back into this home." The tears came harder now. Sarah clutched the photo to her chest, feeling the full weight of her mistake. The women at the office didn't know anything. They were gossiping, making assumptions based on who they thought Alexander was, not who he really was. Sarah ran through the house looking for him. "Margaret," she called. "Where's Alexander?" Margaret appeared in the kitchen with a sad expression. "Oh, Miss Sarah. He left this morning with little Lily. Said they were going to visit his sister in Austin for a few days." "For a few days?" "Yes, dear. He seemed quite down when he left." Sarah leaned against the wall, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath her feet. She had ruined everything. Because of gossip, because of fear, because of her own insecurity, she had thrown away the best thing that had ever happened in her life. The house, which had always felt warm and full of life, now felt empty and cold. Without Lily's laughter echoing through the halls, without Alexander popping into the kitchen to sneak bites of whatever Sarah was cooking, without the sense of family that had grown between them, the mansion was just a big, silent building. Sarah went upstairs to her room and sat on the bed, holding the photo and realizing she had made the biggest mistake of her life. She had let fear win over love, insecurity over trust, and now she didn't know if she would get a second chance to make things right. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. Outside, it began to rain, as if the sky itself were crying for missed chances and the words that should have been spoken but never were. A few hours later, Sarah was putting the last book into the box when Margaret gently knocked on the bedroom door. "Miss Sarah." The housekeeper stepped in with an envelope in her hands. "Mr. Alexander left this for you before he left." Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written in Alexander's familiar handwriting, and for a moment she hesitated to open it, afraid of what she might find inside. The letter was long, handwritten on company stationery, but the words were deeply personal. "Sarah, I don't know why you decided to leave, but I respect your choice. Maybe I misread the signs. Maybe I assumed things I shouldn't have. But I need you to know a few things before we go our separate ways. I fell in love with the way you care for Lily. Not out of duty, but as if she were the most precious treasure in the world. I fell in love with the way you laugh quietly when you think no one is watching, like you're keeping small joys to yourself. I fell in love with the books you carry everywhere, the quiet wisdom you share without realizing, the courage it took for you to walk through that first-class curtain on the plane and change our lives forever. I never planned for this after Emma. I thought my heart was permanently shut. But then you arrived with your genuine laughter and your made-up stories, and suddenly my house was alive again. I can't imagine the future without you. I can't imagine Lily growing up without your silly songs and your park adventures. I can't imagine my life without someone who makes me want to be a better man, a better father. If you feel the same, if there's even a chance that we're throwing away something real, I'm at my sister's house in Austin. The address is on the back. If you don't come, I'll understand. And I'll always be grateful for the months you made our house feel like a home. With all my love. Alexander. P. 2000s. Lily keeps asking for her mama. I think she understood something I took too long to realize. Sarah finished reading the letter with tears streaming down her face. She turned the page and found an address in Austin, just 5 hours away by bus. Margaret, who had waited patiently by the door, stepped closer. Miss Sarah, may I say something? Sarah nodded, still holding the letter. In 20 years, working for Mr. Alexander, I've never seen him as happy as he was these past few months. And little Lily, she bloomed with you here. Sometimes the best things come disguised as complications. Sarah looked at the letter, then at her packed suitcases, then at the photo still in her hands. Margaret, do you think it's too late to fix this? Dear, Margaret smiled. It's never too late for true love. The next day, Sarah stood at the New York bus station, wearing a simple navy blue dress and carrying a small suitcase. In her other hand, she held a children's book about a family of ducks she'd picked up on the way. It felt fitting for a new story waiting to begin. The bus ride to Austin was the longest of her life. Sarah shifted between hope and fear, imagining what she would say when she arrived, whether Alexander would be happy to see her or if he had already changed his mind. When she finally arrived at the address, Sarah stood on the sidewalk for a full 5 minutes, gathering her courage. The house was smaller than the mansion in New York, cozier with a front yard where she could see a small child playing. Lily! Mama! Lily shouted the moment she saw Sarah, dropping her toys and running toward her with her little arms stretched out. Sarah knelt down and hugged Lily tightly, feeling like an important part of herself had just fallen back into place. Hi, my little one, she whispered. I missed you. She looked up and saw Alexander standing on the porch, a surprised expression on his face and something that looked like hope. Sarah stood up, still holding Lily, and walked over to him. Without saying a word, she handed him the children's book. I think it's time to start a new story, she said, her voice slightly trembling. Alexander stepped down from the porch and wrapped both her and Lily in an embrace. I missed you so much, he whispered against her hair. I missed you too, Sarah replied, and I'm sorry for running away, for doubting us. It doesn't matter, Alexander said. You're here now. They pulled apart slightly, and Sarah saw that Alexander looked nervous in a way she had never seen before. Sarah, before we go inside, there's something I need to do. To her surprise, he gently placed Lily on the ground and took a small velvet box from his pocket. And right there in the front yard, with Lily clapping beside them, Alexander got down on one knee. Sarah Thompson, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. You came into my life trying not to draw any attention, a quiet passenger just trying to read in peace. But you changed everything. You changed my daughter. You changed my home. You changed my heart. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming freely. Will you be part of this beautiful mess officially and forever? Alexander asked. Yes, Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes, yes. Alexander slid the ring onto her finger and stood up to kiss her, but was interrupted by Lily, who wrapped her arms around their legs, turning it into a group hug that made them all laugh. Family, Lily declared, and Sarah swore she could hear her speak more clearly than ever before. That night, they celebrated with a dinner that was a delightful disaster. Alexander tried to cook something special, but burned the chicken. Sarah spilled wine onto the candles, which tipped dangerously, and Lily managed to smear mashed potatoes across 3 different chairs. To our crazy little family, Alexander said, raising a glass of apple juice since the wine had spilled all over the table. To second chances, Sarah added. Mama. Dada. Lily chimed in, clinking her plastic cup against theirs. Later, as they cleaned up the mess, Sarah looked around the small, messy kitchen at the man drying dishes, while one of the candles still smoked sideways on the table, at the little girl helping by reorganizing napkins on the floor, and thought she had never seen a more perfect scene in her life. A few days later, they returned to New York with Lily asleep in Sarah's lap, and the engagement ring softly catching the light of the airplane. Alexander had insisted they fly back, saying that after all the recent drama, they deserved a bit of comfort. Welcome home, newly engaged. Margaret greeted them at the door with a beaming smile and a tray of champagne. The entire staff is eager to hear all the details. How do you already know? Sarah asked. Surprised. Mr. Alexander might have called from the airport, Margaret admitted with a wink. We waited a few minutes before popping the cork. Robert appeared, carrying their bags, grinning from ear to ear. Congratulations, Miss Sarah. Or should I say, future Mrs. Harrington. Sarah still works, she laughed. At least until I get used to the idea. After putting Lily down for a nap, Sarah and Alexander settled into the study for the most important call of the day. Sarah's mom appeared on the screen with an expectant look. Mom, Sarah began, trying to stay composed. We have some news. You finally admitted you're dating? Mrs. Thompson asked bluntly. A bit more than that. Alexander appeared on screen, taking Sarah's hand and showing the ring. The scream Mrs. Thompson let out probably woke the neighbors in Texas. I knew it. I knew it from that very first dinner. Sarah Marie Thompson. Why didn't you tell me he was going to propose? Because I didn't know. Sarah laughed. It was a complete surprise. When's the wedding? Where's it going to be? How many guests? Have you picked the flowers yet? Mom, breathe. Sarah said, we just got engaged 2 days ago. 2 days is an eternity in wedding planning time, her mom declared. I need to start calling everyone right away. Alexander looked at Sarah with a slightly alarmed expression. Everyone. My family is enthusiastic, Sarah explained. And large. 2 weeks later, they had set a date. A simple Saturday in the garden. Just close family and a few dear friends. Sarah wanted something small and meaningful, not a Hollywood production. How many people do you think your mom will bring? Alexander asked on the Thursday before the wedding. She said it would be just close relatives. Sarah answered as she arranged the final flower details. Maybe 10 people at most. On Friday afternoon, 3 vans pulled up at the front of the house. Sarah looked out the window and felt the blood drain from her face. Alexander, she called, her voice strangely calm. Remember when I said 10 people? Yes. I may have slightly underestimated my mother's definition of close relatives. 32 of Sarah's relatives poured out of the vans like clowns from a circus car. There were uncles, aunts, cousins, second cousins, and some people Sarah was pretty sure she had never seen before, but who were apparently third-degree relatives by marriage. Alexander stood at the entrance, watching the peaceful invasion with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly tricky logistics problem. Well, he finally said, at least we know the party will be lively. Are you panicking? Sarah asked, concerned. I'm calculating how many rooms we have and whether I can turn the library into a temporary bedroom, he admitted. But no, I'm not panicking. This is your family, and tomorrow it'll be our family. Sarah fell a little more in love with him right then. Over the next 2 hours, Alexander turned his home into a makeshift hotel. The library became a room for the single uncles. The game room housed the teenage cousins, and the office was converted into a space for the grandparents. Mr. Alexander, Margaret whispered as she passed by carrying stacks of towels. May I say you're handling this with impressive grace? Margaret, Alexander replied, helping carry sheets. If I survived the past few months with Sarah and Lily, I can survive one night with the Thompson family. The next day, the garden was transformed. Simple but elegant flowers decorated an improvised altar under the big tree where Sarah and Alexander had shared so many conversations. White chairs were arranged in small, cozy rows, and soft lights were strung through the branches, ready to glow as the sun went down. Sarah looked out the bedroom window and smiled. It was exactly what she had dreamed of. Simple, warm, and full of love. Ready, dear? Her mother asked, adjusting the simple veil Sarah had chosen. More than ready, Sarah replied. The ceremony began with Lily as the flower girl, wearing a white dress and carrying a pillow with the rings. She started walking down the aisle with serious determination. But halfway through, she tripped on the carpet and landed on her bottom, sending the rings flying. Instead of crying, Lily looked around, saw everyone smiling warmly, and started clapping for her own dramatic performance. That's right, sweetheart. Sarah laughed, walking over to help her up. Always finish with flair. During the ceremony, Sarah's Uncle Charlie, apparently misunderstanding the moment, began singing Amazing Grace right in the middle of the vows without a microphone and slightly off-key. Instead of stopping him, the whole family joined in, turning the interruption into a beautiful, spontaneous moment. When it was time for the vows, Sarah held Alexander's hands and looked into his eyes. "Alexander," she began, her voice steady, but full of emotion, "you've shown me that courage isn't about shouting, but about walking through curtains. That family isn't perfection. It's acceptance. That love doesn't fix everything, but it makes everything possible." "Sarah," Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion, "you taught me not to fix everything, but to feel everything. You showed me that messes can be beautiful, that control is an illusion, and that sometimes the best things in life show up disguised as complications." The kiss that followed was sweet, gentle, and interrupted only by Lily running up to hug both their legs, creating a moment Sarah knew she'd never forget. "Family," Lily announced. And this time, Sarah was sure everyone heard it. The celebration that followed was exactly the kind of organized chaos Sarah had learned to love. Her grandfather took over the microphone all night. Uncle Jimmy managed to eat half the cake before the toast, and 3 different cousins spilled wine on their clothes during the speeches. But when Sarah danced with Alexander in the garden under the soft lights, with Lily sleeping in Margaret's arms and her loud, crazy family singing off-key in the background, she knew she wouldn't change a thing. "No regrets?" Alexander asked, twirling her gently. "None," Sarah smiled. "Well, maybe we should have hidden the cake better. Note to self for our anniversary party." Alexander laughed. "Already planning the next party?" "Sarah Harrington," he said, testing out the name. "I'm planning the rest of our crazy, wonderful life." And as they danced under the stars with the sounds of family and love all around them, Sarah thought that some of the best stories really do begin with the